Have you ever wondered about the stories hidden in the silence of those who live unnoticed? What if the greatest lessons were never written down, but spoken, carried from one generation to the next by the ones who lived them? Meet M.O. Langston, a man who never learned to read or write, but whose wisdom, forged in the fires of struggle, could change everything you thought you knew about knowledge, education, and resilience. His life is a testament to the untold histories of people who fought, survived, and thrived in ways the world never bothered to acknowledge. And now, at the age when most retire into quiet, M.O. has been invited to teach at a university. But the lessons he brings are far from ordinary. Through his words, we'll explore the true power of storytelling, the unbreakable strength of perseverance, and the kind of wisdom that cannot be measured by degrees or citations. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories just like this. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share what lessons you think the world needs to hear. Now, let's step into M.O. Langston's world and discover the legacy that can never be forgotten. Disclaimer: the following story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of providing moral lessons, motivation, inspiration, and other forms of learning. While the characters and events portrayed in this video are not based on real individuals or occurrences, the themes and messages aim to inspire reflection on perseverance, resilience, and the power of storytelling. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. The intent of this story is to encourage personal growth and foster deeper understanding, not to depict specific historical events or individuals. Thank you for watching and engaging with this content. We hope you find it meaningful and thought-provoking. In the heart of Kansas, M.O. Langston is an elderly black man who has never learned to read or write, yet possesses a vast treasure trove of wisdom, history, and life lessons. For decades, he has quietly lived in the shadows, his stories carried through the generations by word of mouth. But when his experiences as a laborer, a father, and a survivor go viral, M.O. is invited to share his profound knowledge at a university, not as an academic but as a living archive of history and resilience. As M.O. teaches the students about perseverance, survival, and the untold struggles of everyday people, he challenges the world's idea of what education truly means. His stories break barriers, raise tough questions, and inspire those around him to reconsider the ways in which knowledge is valued and passed down. With his unmatched ability to speak truth to power, M.O. leaves an indelible mark on the hearts of those willing to listen. This is a story of dignity, perseverance, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are, even when the world tries to overlook you. M.O. Langston's legacy is a testament to the power of storytelling, not just as a means of remembering the past, but as a way to build the future. The sun beat down gently on 9th Street, casting long shadows over the cracked sidewalks and faded murals that lined the aging neighborhood. Wichita was changing, with new glass buildings rising downtown, but here on 9th Street time moved differently. Here the old stories still hung in the air, like smoke from the barbecue pits that dotted the block. On a worn wooden bench in front of Johnson's Corner store sat a man who had become a fixture of the street itself. His name was Amos Langston, though most simply called him M.O. His skin was a deep, rich brown, weathered by years under the Kansas sun. His hands, rough and calloused, often moved animatedly as he spoke, helping to paint pictures that his words could not always reach. Every afternoon, after the heat had broken but before the night air settled in, M.O. would be found on that bench, spinning stories. He wore a battered straw hat most days and a pair of overalls so old they seemed part of him. His voice, a warm rumble like distant thunder, carried tales that pulled in anyone who cared to listen. Children who had long since tired of their phones would circle around him, sitting cross-legged on the sidewalk, their faces lit with wonder. Construction workers would stop mid-shift, eating sandwiches as they leaned on their trucks to hear just a little more. Even the elderly, those who remembered the world before integration and before the highways carved up their neighborhoods, came to hear M.O. tell it like it was. M.O. could not read a book or write his name in a way that matched the smooth, clean letters you found in classrooms. Life had never given him that luxury. But he carried more history in his head than most libraries. His grandmother had been a walking legend in Tulsa, and M.O. remembered every story she told him. He could recount the Great Migration like he had lived it, and in many ways he had. He spoke of the weight black folks had carried, the battles they had fought, and the hope that refused to die no matter how many times it was crushed. One evening, as the Kansas sun sank low and the cicadas buzzed in the bushes, a college student named Mariah Jefferson passed by. She had grown up on these streets but now attended Kansas State University, a first-generation college student proud of her roots. Her backpack sagged heavy with books, and her mind was knotted with deadlines and exams. Mariah paused when she heard Mo's voice. Something about it stopped her in her tracks. She tucked her phone into her pocket and stood among the small crowd gathering around him. Mo was telling a story about the night his mother had hidden him and his sisters under the floorboards when the white mobs came through their town in Oklahoma. His voice was steady, not angry, but the pain was woven through his words like threads in a tapestry. Mariah could almost see it, the terror in the dark, the sound of heavy boots overhead, the hush of her mother's desperate breathing. Tears pricked at her eyes. She reached for her phone again, almost without thinking, and began to record. Not for fame, not for clicks, but because she knew deep down that this voice, this living history, had to be preserved. That night, sitting at her tiny desk in a cramped dorm room, Mariah uploaded the video. She titled it "Wisdom You Cannot Find in Books." She closed her laptop without much thought and fell asleep, the sound of Mo's voice still swirling in her dreams. When she woke, the world had changed. Morning light crept through the dusty blinds of Mariah's dorm room, painting the floor in thin stripes of gold. She blinked awake to the sound of her phone buzzing over and over again. Groggy, she reached for it, expecting messages from friends or reminders about forgotten assignments. What she found instead made her sit up straight. Hundreds of notifications flooded her screen. Comments, shares, reposts. The video of Mr. Mo Langston on 9th Street had exploded overnight. Strangers from cities she had never been to were writing things like, "This man speaks the truth, and we need more voices like his in our history books." Mariah's heart raced. She clicked through to see that the video had already been shared by influencers, journalists, and even a few local news outlets. Someone had tagged her in a post. "Who is this wise man? Where can we hear more?" Within hours, journalists started calling. Radio hosts sent emails. Podcast producers begged for interviews. But Mariah knew deep in her chest that this was not about her. It was about Mo. It had always been about Mo. Meanwhile, back on 9th Street, Mo was oblivious. He sat on his usual bench, a cup of black coffee balanced on the armrest, nodding hello to the people passing by. Some cars honked as they drove past, and a few unfamiliar faces waved at him. Mo chuckled under his breath, thinking little of it. In his world, each day looked much the same as the last, and he liked it that way. That afternoon, Mariah made her way back to the corner store, her steps quick and nervous. She found Mo already holding court with a small crowd, recounting the story of his first job as a boy, cleaning train cars for pennies. He spoke about the pride he felt bringing home those few coins, handing them to his mother with both hands like they were treasure. When he finished, Mariah approached him cautiously. "Mr. Langston," she said, voice low but urgent, "you are not going to believe this." He lifted his chin and looked at her with a slow smile. "Believe what, baby girl?" "You have gone viral," she said, almost whispering like it was a secret too big to say aloud. Mo blinked at her, confused. "Viral?" he said, rolling the word around in his mouth like a stone. Mariah nodded. "It means a lot of people heard you. Millions. They're talking about you all over the country." He let out a low whistle and shook his head. "Humph. Guess folks still got ears after all." She laughed, feeling some of her tension slip away. Mo had that way about him, steady as the river no matter how fast the world moved around him. Still, Mariah knew this was serious. She told him about the invitations pouring in. News programs wanted to feature him. Book publishers were curious. Universities, she said carefully, were interested in having him speak. At the mention of universities, Mo stiffened slightly. His face, normally so open, closed like a door against a cold wind. He shifted on the bench and sipped his coffee, giving nothing away. Mariah sat beside him, patient. "Look," she said after a long moment, "I know it sounds scary, but you have something they need, Mr. Langston. They think knowledge comes from paper and degrees. You come from a place deeper than that." He grunted. "Ain't never sat in no fancy classroom," he said. "I know," she said softly. "That is exactly why you need to go." Mo stared out at the street for a long time, watching a rusted pickup truck rattle past. He thought about his mother, who had scrubbed hotel floors until her hands cracked and bled. He thought about the elders who had died with their stories buried deep inside them, never heard, never honored. Finally, he nodded, almost to himself. "All right, baby girl," he said, standing up slow and deliberate, as though the moment deserved ceremony. "You set it up. I will go. But I am going to speak my way, not theirs." Mariah smiled, relief and pride mixing in her chest. "Yes, sir," she said. "Your way is exactly what they need." In the distance, the church bells began to ring, slow and solemn, marking the hour. The old man and the young woman sat side by side on the bench, two generations connected by history and hope. And though neither could see the future, both knew something had been set in motion that would not be stopped. The river had begun to rise. The air inside Kansas State University's grand hall smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. Mariah had never seen anything quite like it before, even though she had been attending classes there for 2 years. Arched ceilings stretched high overhead like the ribs of a giant beast, and stained glass windows scattered soft light across the marble floors. This was where Mr. Amos Langston would speak. It had taken days of emails and phone calls, but Dr. Carmen Willis, a respected professor of American history, had personally invited M.O. to deliver a guest lecture. She called it The People's Histories, a new series meant to bring voices from outside academia into the heart of the university. Dr. Willis was a tall woman with a smooth, commanding voice and a streak of silver in her thick hair. She met Mariah and M.O. at the university gates on a windy afternoon, dressed in a navy blue dress and sensible shoes. Students bustled around them, their faces buried in phones or bent low under backpacks heavy with textbooks. M.O. shifted uncomfortably in the button-down shirt Mariah had insisted he wear. His usual overalls stayed folded in the plastic shopping bag he carried, just in case he needed to change back into something more familiar. "Mr. Langston," Dr. Willis said warmly, extending her hand. "We are honored to have you here." M.O. took her hand, his grip firm. "Appreciate you inviting me, ma'am," he said. "But I don't talk like no professor." Dr. Willis smiled. "That is exactly why we want you." They led him through the sprawling campus, past manicured lawns and towering sculptures. Students turned their heads to stare, some whispering behind their hands. Mariah walked beside him, her heart pounding. She knew this was bigger than a simple lecture. It was a statement, a reclamation of whose voices deserved to be heard. Inside the hall, preparations were underway. A podium had been placed at the front, though when M.O. saw it, he frowned. "I ain't gonna stand behind no fancy box," he said, crossing his arms. Dr. Willis laughed. "Then we will move it," she said without hesitation. By the time evening rolled around, the room was filled to the brim. Students, professors, journalists, and even a few curious locals packed into the rows of chairs. Some clutched notepads. Others held up phones, ready to capture every moment. Backstage, M.O. sat quietly, breathing slow and deep. He was not nervous, not exactly. He had seen harder things than this stage. He had faced hate and hunger, loneliness and loss. But still, standing before a crowd like this was no small thing. Mariah leaned down beside him. "Just tell your stories," she whispered. "That is more than enough." M.O. nodded. The old stories. The ones that lived in his bones, passed down like heirlooms from mouths long gone silent. When Dr. Willis stepped onto the stage and introduced him, her words were simple. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "tonight we welcome a scholar of life. A keeper of histories not found in your textbooks. Please open your hearts to Mr. Amos Langston." The applause rose like a tide. M.O. stood slowly, straightening his shoulders. He stepped into the lights, blinking against their harshness. He wore no notes. He carried no book. All he had was his voice, the weight of memory, and the truth etched deep into his soul. He looked out over the sea of young faces, some skeptical, some eager, all waiting. He opened his mouth and began to speak. "I come from a long line of folks who made a way where there was none," he said, his voice rich and deep. "Folks who tilled land they didn't own, built homes they weren't allowed to live in, fought battles without ever picking up a gun." The room grew still. The only sound was the quiet hum of the lights overhead and the steady, unwavering beat of M.O. Langston's voice weaving the past into the present. He told them about growing up in a shotgun house with a tin roof that rattled every time the wind blew. He spoke of walking miles to school, only to find the doors locked because of the color of his skin. He spoke of watching his father vanish into the fields for days on end, working a white man's land for a handful of dollars. But he did not speak only of sorrow. He spoke of resilience. Of Sunday dinners cooked from scraps but seasoned with love. Of dances under the stars where laughter drowned out despair. Of the secret networks of help that sprang up in the darkness, neighbors lifting each other when the world would not. By the time he finished, there were tears in the eyes of students who had never known such hardship and pride swelling in the hearts of those who had. When M.O. stepped back from the microphone, the silence that followed was heavy and sacred, like a prayer. Then slowly at first the applause began to build. It rose until it filled the great hall, crashing against the stained glass windows and rattling the ancient wood beams. M.O. Langston stood tall, his hands folded calmly in front of him, the storm of gratitude washing over him like a blessing. Outside, the stars blinked into existence, old witnesses to a new chapter unfolding. In the days that followed Mr. Langston's first lecture, a buzz filled Kansas State University. Students who had once rushed between classes with headphones plugged into their ears now spoke to one another in animated voices, recounting the stories Mo had shared as if they had lived them themselves. The university had expected a mild interest, a polite turnout. What they got was something entirely different. Word spread quickly and soon more lectures were requested. Entire classes altered their schedules to attend. History majors, sociology students, and even engineering students packed into whatever rooms were available, eager to listen. But Mr. Langston had his own ideas about how to teach. He refused the grand lecture halls with their echoing ceilings and bright spotlights. He chose instead a smaller room in the community center near campus, a place with folding chairs, linoleum floors, and windows that stuck when you tried to open them. A place that felt real. Each session began the same way. Mo would sit on a simple chair at the front, coffee cup in one hand, eyes scanning the room. There was no script, no list of topics. He simply asked, "What y'all want to know about?" And from there the lessons unfolded. One day he spoke of the Negro Leagues, the pride of black baseball players who carved out greatness when major league doors were slammed shut. Another day he told of the Great Depression, not from the dusty vantage point of statistics, but through the aching memory of hunger gnawing at his belly as a boy. He described the feeling of hope when, despite everything, his mother bought him a brand new pair of shoes he dared not scuff because they were the finest thing he had ever owned. Students leaned in closer each time he spoke, scribbling notes, recording voice memos, hanging on every word. They marveled at how Mo could describe a world so different from their own but make them feel as if they had been there, breathing the same dusty air, tasting the same bitter defeats and sweet victories. Mo made history human. He spoke about segregation without bitterness, only truth. He recounted how he had sat at the back of buses, not out of fear but out of defiance. Better to sit at the back with your pride intact, he said, than stand at the front and forget who you are. He described meeting activists who had marched on Washington, shaking hands with men who had once been beaten bloody for demanding to be treated as human beings. He told them that history was not just written by the winners. It lived in the scars and songs and silences of those who had been pushed aside. One afternoon, a young woman raised her hand hesitantly. "Mr. Langston," she said, her voice trembling, "how did you survive it? How did you keep going?" Mo paused, his face thoughtful. A deep stillness settled over the room. "I survived," he said slowly, "because my mama taught me that hope ain't just something you feel. It is something you do. It is a choice. Every day you get up, you keep walking. You keep Logan. You keep loving. You keep remembering. That is how you fight back." The room was silent, the students absorbing every syllable like parched earth drinking rain. After the lectures, students often lingered, reluctant to leave. They asked him about music, about the best barbecue in Kansas, about the meaning of old sayings their grandparents used. And Mo answered each question with patience and a sly smile, weaving every answer into a story. Dr. Willis, who attended each session quietly from the back of the room, watched with wonder. She had spent decades studying history, but she had never seen it come alive like this. Mo Langston was doing something no textbook could. He was awakening the soul of the past. One afternoon after a session, Dr. Willis approached Mo as he packed up his things. "You are changing this university," she said, voice thick with emotion. Mo chuckled softly, slipping on his battered straw hat. "Not changing it," he said. "Just reminding it of what it forgot." Outside, the Kansas wind stirred the leaves into slow, swirling dances. The sky stretched wide and open above them, heavy with the promise of storms to come and the certainty that, whatever else changed, the stories would endure. The first cold winds of autumn swept through Kansas, turning the trees into explosions of red and gold. The mornings were brisk now, and Mo Langston could feel the chill settle deep into his bones. Yet every day he rose early, washed his face in the cold water from the cracked sink at home, and set off for the university with his battered coat buttoned tight. The sessions had outgrown the community center. Now they met in a weathered auditorium near the heart of campus, still modest compared to the great halls, but big enough to hold the growing crowds. Word of mouth had traveled beyond the university. Elders from nearby neighborhoods came. High school teachers brought their students. Even a few journalists crept in at the back, scribbling notes for their articles. Despite the growing attention, Mo remained the same. He told the story of the Great Migration one rainy afternoon, how entire families packed their belongings into suitcases and left behind the southern soil their ancestors had worked for generations. They traveled north and west in search of dignity and jobs, believing the cities would offer a better life. Some found what they sought. Many did not. Dreams, Mo said quietly, are heavy things to carry, especially when the world puts rocks in your pockets. He spoke of the civil rights movement not as a distant event but as something he had lived and breathed. He described the fear in his chest when he first walked into a whites-only diner, the hush that fell over the room, the anger simmering under every polite word. He told them how you learn to smile with your mouth but guard your soul. He talked about the black church, where hymns rolled up from tired throats and filled the rafters with hope so fierce it could make you forget, for a few hours, the weight of the outside world. He described funerals for young men who never had a chance to grow old, and weddings that stitched communities together tighter than any law could. Every story Mo told carried the gravity of lived experience. Every detail was stitched into the fabric of truth. There were no theories, no detached observations. Only life, raw and beautiful and brutal. The students felt it. They leaned forward in their chairs, silent and wide-eyed. They were not just learning history. They were feeling it. But with the rising fame came tension. One afternoon, after a particularly powerful session about the Tulsa Race Massacre, a young man approached Mo outside. He wore an expensive jacket and spoke with the careful cadence of someone used to being heard. "Mr. Langston," he said, "have you thought about writing a book? You could make a lot of money. Tell your story the right way. Clean it up a little, make it easier for people to digest." Mo looked at him for a long moment, his eyes sharp and steady. "Son," he said, voice low, "I ain't here to be digested." The young man flushed and stammered something before hurrying away. Mariah, who had witnessed the exchange, fell into step beside Mo as they walked down the cracked sidewalk toward the bus stop. "You could write a book, you know," she said carefully. "We could find someone to help." Mo chuckled. "Books are fine," he said, "but paper can burn. Stories carried in hearts? Those last." Mariah nodded, understanding. Mr. Langston was not chasing fame. He was doing what his mother and his mother's mother had taught him to do. Speak the truth. Pass it on. Keep the fire alive. Still, the offers kept coming. Television interviews, magazine features, speaking tours. Universities from other states reached out, offering generous fees and promises of bigger stages. Mo refused most of them. He stayed in Kansas, close to the streets where he had lived, close to the people who still needed to hear that they mattered. He taught not for applause, but because silence was too heavy a burden to leave behind. One evening, as the sun set low over the flat Kansas horizon, Mo and Mariah sat together on a bench outside the auditorium. The sky was ablaze with color, the wind crisp and full of the scent of fallen leaves. "You tired yet?" Mariah asked, nudging him gently. Mo smiled, lines creasing deeper around his eyes. "Tired," he said, "but not finished." They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to prick the sky, a new constellation forming in the shape of everything they had built together: memory, truth, and the unbreakable thread of perseverance. In that quiet moment it was clear. Mo Langston had become more than a guest speaker, more than a viral sensation. He had become a living bridge between what was and what could still be. As winter settled over Kansas, a sharpness crept into the air that even the thickest coats could not soften. Snow fell in slow, heavy sheets, blanketing the campus in a deceptive quiet. Beneath the surface, however, tension stirred like a pot left too long on the fire. Not everyone was pleased with Mr. Langston's presence. A few professors, though careful with their words, made their discomfort known in meetings and closed-door discussions. They questioned whether a man who could not read or write should be considered a legitimate educator, whether his sessions diluted the university's standards. They spoke of tradition, of reputation, of academic rigor. Their arguments were always wrapped in polite language, but the message underneath was clear. Mo Langston did not belong. Dr. Willis fought for him fiercely, attending faculty meetings with the sharpness of a woman who had climbed too many mountains to bow her head now. She defended Mo not just with passion but with the evidence of packed rooms, moved hearts, and changed minds. Yet every victory she won felt increasingly fragile. The students noticed the shift too. Mariah overheard whispered conversations in hallways, saw the skeptical glances from some professors who refused to acknowledge Mo when they passed him on campus. Mo noticed it as well, though he never said a word. He moved with the same steady dignity he always had, his old boots crunching through the snow, his battered coat pulled tight against the wind. One afternoon, after a session where he spoke about the resilience of black farmers during the Dust Bowl, a thinly veiled challenge came. A student, older than the others and wearing a sharp blazer, raised his hand high. Mr. Langston, he said, voice smooth, with all due respect, how can you expect us to take your lessons seriously when you have no formal education? No degree? No citations to back your claims? A ripple ran through the room. Mariah tensed in her seat, her fists clenching at her sides. Mo set down his coffee cup carefully on the wooden crate he used as a table. He rose from his chair, his back straight, his eyes clear. You want my credentials, he said, voice calm but full of steel. Here they are. He held up his hands, rough and scarred from decades of labor. These hands picked cotton, till they bled. They built houses with no blueprints. They raised children when the law said I was barely a man. They buried friends whose only crime was being born in the wrong skin. He tapped 2 fingers against his temple. This mind, he said, carried the names and stories of my people when nobody else bothered to write them down. Remembered the songs, the prayers, the battles fought on back roads and in back rooms. Then he laid his hand flat against his chest. And this heart right here? It has survived more storms than you can imagine. That is my degree. That is my proof. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the old radiator rattling in the corner. The student sat back down, his face red, his mouth clamped shut. Mo returned to his chair, picking up his coffee once more. Without missing a beat, he launched into a story about sharecropping families hiding pennies in glass jars buried beneath oak trees, saving for futures they might never see. The tension in the room dissolved into rapt attention once again, drawn into the gravity of Mo's voice, the truth that lived in his every word. Later that night, Mariah found Mo sitting alone on a bench near the library, a thin plume of breath rising in the cold air. You handled that better than I would've, she said, sitting beside him. Mo chuckled softly, his breath rattling in his chest. Folks always gonna test you, he said. It ain't about proving nothing. It's about remembering who you are while they do it. They sat together in the cold, the old and the young, the living bridge between what had been and what could still be. Overhead, the stars burned fiercely against the dark sky, a reminder that even in the coldest seasons, some lights never dimmed. Spring crept back into Kansas with slow, deliberate steps. The snow melted into the thirsty ground, leaving behind muddy patches and the stubborn green of new grass. On the university grounds, tulips pushed their way up through the soil, a quiet rebellion against the cold that had tried to bury them. Mr. Langston's lectures continued, each one drawing larger crowds. New faces appeared each week, some from other cities, some from out of state. Word had spread farther than anyone could have expected. But for all the attention, Mo remained grounded, his battered coat slung over his chair, his hat tipped low when he spoke. One bright morning, Dr. Willis called an emergency meeting with Mo and Mariah in her small, book-cluttered office. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting warm patterns across the floor. I need to show you something, Dr. Willis said, her voice thick with emotion. She handed Mo a crisp letter, the official seal of Kansas State University pressed into the corner. Mariah leaned in to read over his shoulder. The letter detailed a new honorary position. Mr. Moses Langston, Keeper of Oral Histories. A title created specifically for him. No degree required. No test to pass. His life was his qualification. The university was establishing a permanent program in his name, an oral history archive dedicated to preserving the voices and experiences that traditional textbooks had ignored. They wanted Mo to continue sharing, mentoring students, guiding researchers. They wanted his stories to live forever. Mo set the letter down carefully, as if it might crumble beneath the weight of its own meaning. I never asked for no honors, he said, his voice rough. Dr. Willis smiled gently. Sometimes the world finally catches up to what you have already been. There would be a ceremony, she explained. Small, dignified, nothing fancy, just a gathering to mark the occasion. The day of the event, Mo stood outside the auditorium watching the crowd filter inside. Students, professors, janitors, deans, neighbors from the South Side, preachers, musicians, even rival schools sent representatives. They filled the seats until there was no room left to sit. As he stepped up to the podium, a hush fell over the room. Mo wore his usual clothes, pressed as best he could, but still humble. No fancy robes, no stiff suit to hide who he was. He looked out at the crowd, saw Mariah beaming near the front, Dr. Willis nodding in quiet pride, saw young faces hungry for the truth. He cleared his throat. I ain't no scholar, he said, voice strong and steady. Ain't no preacher neither. Just a man who's lived long enough to know that the stories we carry are heavier than gold. He spoke of memory, of how people tried to bury the hard parts of history, how they wrapped the truth in silk so it would not offend. He spoke of the power of words spoken aloud, of histories passed from mouth to ear across kitchen tables, in barbershops, on dusty front porches. Books are important, he said, but they ain't the only way to know the world. Sometimes the world lives right here. He tapped his chest. And it is our job to pass it on. The room rose in a standing ovation, a wave of gratitude crashing over him. Later, in the quiet after the ceremony, Mo sat alone for a moment in the now empty hall. His hands rested in his lap, rough and calloused, a testament to a lifetime of work the world had once overlooked. Mariah approached and handed him a small leather-bound notebook. "I thought you might want to start writing down your own stories," she said shyly. "We can do it together. I will write them as you tell them." Mo chuckled, a deep rumble that filled the room. "Maybe it is time," he said, turning the notebook over in his hands. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows that stretched across the empty campus. Mo stood slowly, slipping the notebook into his coat pocket. As he stepped outside, the Kansas wind lifted the brim of his hat, and he pulled it down with a practiced hand. The sky above him was endless and wild, a living canvas of blues and golds. He walked on, steady and sure, carrying a history too big for any one book, a legacy stitched into the very soil of the earth, whispered in the winds and etched into the hearts of all those who had heard him speak. And somewhere beyond the horizon, where stories live forever, another chapter waited to be told. The end. Moral lessons from this story. 1. True wisdom is not measured by formal education. In a world that often worships degrees, certificates, and framed achievements, the story of Mo Langston reminds us that wisdom cannot be confined to a classroom or measured by standardized tests. True wisdom is earned in the fields where your hands blister, in the neighborhoods where your back is against the wall, and in the quiet moments where survival itself is an act of triumph. Mo could not read or write, yet he carried within him a deep and priceless knowledge of history, struggle, and resilience. His wisdom was crafted through lived experiences, not textbooks. Every scar on his hands, every wrinkle on his face, and every story etched into his memory spoke of a life that taught more than any lecture hall ever could. The world often forgets this. It builds barriers between those with formal education and those without, assuming that letters after a name are proof of deeper understanding. But Mo Langston showed us that knowledge lives in the souls of those who have endured, who have fought invisible battles, who have kept the flame of truth alive when the winds of history tried to blow it out. Formal education is valuable. It opens doors. But it is not the only road to wisdom. Life itself is a teacher. And those who listen closely to its lessons can often see more clearly than those who sit atop towers of books. 2. Dignity cannot be given or taken away by others. Throughout his journey, Mo Langston faced many who tried to define his worth. Whether it was professors questioning his credentials or young men suggesting he package his story into something more digestible, he stood firm in the quiet dignity he had carried all his life. Dignity is not something that can be handed out by universities, employers, or society. It is not awarded at ceremonies or stripped away by insults. True dignity is forged inside the human spirit. It is carried by those who know their own worth, even when the world refuses to see it. Mo did not change himself to fit the expectations of the academic world. He did not bend under the pressure to clean up his stories or polish his presentation to make it more acceptable. He remained true to who he was, raw, real, and rooted in truth. His life teaches us that dignity is self-owned. It is a silent strength that allows a person to walk upright through storms of doubt, prejudice, and misunderstanding. When you know who you are, no one else gets to decide your value. 3. Storytelling is a sacred responsibility. Mo Langston understood something that modern society often forgets. Storytelling is not entertainment. It is survival. It is identity. It is the bridge between generations, ensuring that what was suffered, what was achieved, and what was hoped for is never lost to time. In Mo's lectures, he did not simply relay facts and dates. He breathed life into history. He honored the names and lives of those who had been overlooked, buried under layers of silence. He taught young people not just to remember but to feel, to carry the weight of their ancestors' dreams and struggles. Storytelling is sacred. It is a duty to speak the truth, especially when the truth is inconvenient or painful. It is an act of love for those who came before and those who will come after. Without people like Mo, history becomes sterile and hollow. With him, it became a living, beating heart that refused to be forgotten. For perseverance is built one day at a time. Mo Langston's success did not come overnight. It came one day at a time, through decades of labor, humility, and endurance. There were no shortcuts, no meteoric rises to fame. Every lesson he taught was born from years of surviving and thriving in a world that did not make it easy. Perseverance is often misunderstood. It is not just about enduring hardship. It is about showing up again and again, even when the reward seems small or non-existent. It is about choosing to keep your spirit intact when bitterness would be the easier path. Mo's life was a quiet, powerful testimony to perseverance. He worked menial jobs without shame. He learned and taught without formal training. He endured slights and challenges without losing himself. Perseverance does not look dramatic. It looks like a man standing alone in a cold classroom, telling stories no one asked him to tell, simply because it needed to be done. It looks like a seed pushing through frozen soil, trusting that spring will come. 5. Silence can be more dangerous than lies. One of the most powerful lessons from Mo's journey is the danger of silence. Throughout history, entire chapters have been erased, ignored, or smoothed over to avoid discomfort. Mo stood against that silence. He understood that what is not spoken risks being forgotten, and what is forgotten risks being repeated. There is a price to pretending that hard truths do not exist. Injustice thrives in silence. Ignorance feeds on what is left unsaid. Healing is delayed when wounds are covered rather than confronted. Mo refused to be silent, even when speaking the truth cost him opportunities or drew criticism. His courage teaches us that sometimes raising your voice is not about anger. It is about love. Love for the future, love for those who deserve better, love for the truth itself. In a time where it is easy to choose the comfort of polite forgetting, Mo chose the hard work of remembrance. He reminds us that silence is not neutral. It is a choice, and sometimes it is the wrong one. 6. Change begins with those willing to stand alone. Before the crowds came, before the university accepted him, before his story went viral, Mo Langston stood alone. He spoke into rooms half filled with skeptical faces. He endured doubt, disrespect, and dismissal. But he did not stop. Change rarely begins with mass movements or public approval. It begins with one person willing to speak when others stay silent. It begins with someone who refuses to compromise their soul for the sake of acceptance. Mo's courage to stand alone sparked a movement within the university and beyond. Students began to listen. Professors began to reconsider. Communities began to honor voices they had long ignored. It was not easy. It never is. But Mo's life shows us that the first step toward meaningful change is often a lonely one. And those brave enough to take it are the ones who shift the world, even if only a little at a time. 7. Legacy is built through love, not fame. At the end of it all, after the honorary titles and the applause, Mo Langston's greatest achievement was not the recognition he received. It was the love he left behind. Love for his people, love for history, love for truth. Legacy is not measured in awards or headlines. It is measured in the hearts touched, the minds awakened, the courage kindled in others. Fame fades. Statues crumble. But love, passed from one generation to the next, endures. Mo's life reminds us that we build our legacies not through grand gestures but through the quiet, daily work of caring, teaching, and standing firm in what we believe. His stories planted seeds that would grow long after he was gone. When you choose to live with integrity, when you speak truth with love, when you invest your heart into those who come after you, you create a legacy that no storm can erase. Mo Langston built such a legacy. And because of that, he will never truly be forgotten. Thank you so much for watching and listening to the legacy of Mo Langston. We hope that Mo's journey of wisdom, perseverance, and dignity has inspired you as much as it has inspired us. Stories like Mo's remind us that knowledge comes in many forms, and sometimes the greatest lessons are the ones passed down through the generations, not in books but in lived experience. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on more stories that inspire, motivate, and challenge us to grow. And if you have thoughts or comments, we'd love to hear from you below. What part of Mo's journey resonated with you the most? Be sure to check out our other videos for more inspiring stories. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep sharing your story.